Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you around the CAMCA region and around the world. Welcome to the final session of the CAMCA Forum this year. Today's topic is about the education systems of the CAMCA countries and to what extent they can adjust to the new labor market demands. Indeed, the future of CAMCA countries and the region as a whole will be shaped significantly by the level of and the quality of education there. So those countries that transform the education systems, that will develop modern and reliable skills, will advance, and those who lag behind will face further challenges, clearly. Now, the session today will attempt to address the following questions. How innovation in education can foster and shape social, economic, and institutional modernization and growth of the CAMCA countries? Should educational reforms begin at the top or from the bottom of education systems? How can modern education both reward talent but also satisfy demands for equity? And also, can existing educational institutions evolve fast enough to provide transforming societies with leaders and workers much needed? And finally, we will discuss to what extent the legislation on education can change fast enough to meet national and also regional demands. So today I have a privilege and honor to join this session as a moderator with distinguished speakers. We have today Dr. Shams Kasim Laka, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the University of Central Asia. We have Faris Ismail Zadeh, Executive Vice Rector, ADA University, Azerbaijan. We also have Mr. Hikmat Abdurrahmanov, the CEO and co-founder of Teams University, and also the co-founder of HM Partners, Country Director, Gen Uzbekistan, also CAMCA Network member from Uzbekistan. We have Talan Sultanov, the co-founder and chair, Kyrgyz chapter of Internet Society, CAMCA Network member of Kyrgyzstan, and Dr. Irakli Laitadze, Chief Financial Officer at GMT Dasminda, and lecturer at Ilyas State University in Tbilisi, CAMCA Network member from Georgia. So welcome, gentlemen. It's my pleasure to really share from my perspective, I guess, as a role, to take up the role of the moderator and give some food for thought through a few slides, if you allow me. So can we have the slides on the screen? Today we will talk about the education systems, but how the education system is linked to the labor market, which is rapidly changing because of different disruptions, not only the COVID-19, but also the shocks associated with oil prices, and of course disruptions coming from the fourth industrial revolution. Now, when we have the slides on the screen, I guess, can we have the first slide? Thank you. I think I want to give a general context, I guess. Of course, the pandemic and the oil price fluctuations really gave a strong impetus on the labor markets around the globe, but including particularly the CAMCA countries. We see different countries changing their policies to cope with these demands, to cope with these challenges. And here at Whiteshield Partners, we also developed a couple of years ago the Global Labor Resilience Index that measures basically the level of resilience of labor markets of 131 countries around the world. And yearly at the World Economic Forum in Davos, we present the results of the annual index. And last year I was there as well, presenting the different countries, including the results on Kazakhstan. The next slide, please. So within this index, we author this index together with Sir Christopher Pissarides, the Nobel Prize winner for labor economics. So we look at the matter of resilience of labor markets and how education systems and other sectors influence the level of resilience to different shocks, to the ability to absorb and adapt to different demands as we go along. Next slide, please. In terms of the structure of the index, why it is important is because we need to look at the different international indicators, and we know that in the CAMCA countries we have issues of the quality of statistics that we are trying to work on. But basically, as just like any other indexes, basically this global labor resilience index focuses on two things: the structural part and the cyclical part. Structural part consists of the indicators related to demography, the country capabilities, macroeconomic stability, and different vulnerabilities that are not easy to change in the short run. On the other hand, we have cyclical pillar that consists of absorptive and adaptive capabilities and transformative capabilities and issues related to institutions, which I will talk in the next slides. Next slide, please. Now, resilience of the labor market that is inevitably shaped by the quality of education in the countries can be looked at through different lenses. And here we talk about the disruptions that require different capabilities depending on the type of disruptions that a country faces. So on this slide, if you can see, number one, the capability is the absorptive capability. The capability of a country to absorb the shock. In our case, it's basically COVID-19. It is the quality of their social protection and policy, the employment regulations, and labor market inclusiveness. Now, second, is the ability of a country to adapt to the challenges that the crisis brings. So it's basically the flexibility of the economy and the flexibility of the labor market and the effectiveness of different policies to support different groups and categories of labor force. Now, and the third capability is the transformative capability, is the capability of a country to really transform through the quality of the ICT infrastructure and different technological solutions to take advantage of the challenge of the opportunities that any crisis may bring. Next slide. So here I will not stop that much, but basically this index measures not only the quantity of jobs but also the quality of jobs, and then we see that there's a correlation between the labor market resilience and the productivity and employment in the country. Next slide. And we can skip that slide. Next slide. And of course, in the global indices, we have advanced economies leading, and we have usual suspects like Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands, Singapore. I will not stop on that, but what is it to do with the CAMCA countries? Where do we stand here? So next slide. Next. So in terms of the results for the CAMCA countries, I think it's important to be able to measure, because if you can't measure, you can't manage. So of course, any index can be criticized to different degrees, and we have issues with statistics. But according to the International Organization of Statistics, this index shows the performance of different countries of the CAMCA region in terms of the labor market resilience. We have Kazakhstan leading the index in the region, followed by Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Kyrgyzstan. And there are some strengths that we can leverage to really work on these together, especially on the education system side. Next, please. Overall, CAMCA countries have been progressing over the last 5 years by 10%, and it's actually above average progress if you're talking about the average growth in the world. I will not go into details, but can we have a next slide? So in terms of the country examples like Kazakhstan, it's got strong performance in number of factors, but more importantly, it has some gaps that should be filled in this cyclical resilience. So that's to do with the issues related to the inequality, issues related to the absorptive capabilities, and of course, most of the CAMCA countries enjoy a relatively young population. And of course, that's something that should be leveraged on in a broader sense. Next slide. We'll not stop here. Mongolia, another example where interesting reforms are happening in Mongolia now with new leadership in the country, and we have, of course, matters of enhancing macroeconomic stability that are influencing the stability of the labor market, and then its resilience to different shocks. Next slide. Now, I think what is particularly important is the notion of the future skills. Education and the skills of the future workforce remains one of the key areas for CAMCA countries to improve, and we see a number of challenges across CAMCA countries related particularly to education. Education is one of the CAMCA's weak points, to be honest, especially on the Global Labor Resilience Index. International performance indicators like PISA scores reveal poor outcomes, as seen from this figure. Low score by international standards on the education pillar can be explained by a range of factors, actually, including significant variation in quality of education delivery between rural and urban areas, and also the quality of vocational education, which is one of the key components, actually, in closing the skills in the short run, actually. And clearly, we should think about the new future skills that will be demanded in the future, and to what extent our universities, our training institutes are coping with that pace and providing the education services for new skills now, and to what extent our education system is still promoting the old skills. So, but what is good news is that across the CAMCA countries, in terms of the education policy, we're scoring quite positively on digital skills, which could be leveraged, especially with the level of youth workforce in the region. I will not go deeper to that, but I think I have a couple of more slides here, and I will open the floor for discussion. Of course, we have matters of critical thinking, which is the world average. We have STEM graduates, which are performing relatively well compared to the world average. But I think these are vestiges of the Soviet education system, which is now transformed, and some of the advantages of that should be leveraged. But we need to focus on the vocational education, because it gives an opportunity to really close the gap in the short run, which is important to policymakers, because unfortunately, in many countries, not only in CAMCA, we are talking about the quick wins, and rather than indulging in solving systemic reform issues. I think I have the last slide. I think if you can turn to the last slide. Yes, a whole of country approach. I will not stop here. So I think this was just a food for thought, and how we can match the mismatch. How do we solve this mismatch between the skills that are required in the labor market and the level of this quality level of education systems? And we have here, fortunately enough, the leaders of the industry. And without further ado, I would like to invite to the floor Dr. Shams Kasimlaka to really provide your wisdom, to provide your perspective on this matter and the process. Thank you. Please, Doctor, if you can, if you can switch on your microphone, please.
Okay, I got the microphone on. And,
thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zakashov, for this introduction. I'll address today's topic by focusing on education as a very important vector of national development, but also regional development. And I'm going to focus a little more on the regional development aspects, because CAMCA is really a regional, is concerned about regional development, and we are to explore ideas and approaches to regional development, especially through education, and which is market-oriented, etc. I will do this first by relating the experience of the Aga Khan Development Network, or the AKDN, which was established by His Highness the Aga Khan, who is the Imam or spiritual leader of the Ismaili Muslim community spread over some 30 countries. And the AKDN is focusing on improving the quality of life of the people it serves. That's the main purpose, improving the quality of life of the people. And it doesn't matter who they are, whether they are part of the Ismaili community or the wider community. In fact, the biggest 90% of the beneficiaries of our work are those who are not within our community. The Aga Khan Development Network operates on the basis of not-for-profit, and it is secular in nature and serves all without regard to race, ethnicity, religion, or gender. We work largely in South Asia, mostly in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Central Asia, East and parts of Europe and North America. In the CAMCA region, we operate in Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and from time to time we have also worked in Uzbekistan. We contribute to development of the communities in a holistic manner. Our philosophy is that communities must be developed in a holistic manner and not just focusing on economics or on the culture or sometimes only on health or education. You have to have a holistic approach if we are to make a difference to the people in the communities at large. And we do this also out of conviction that regional development and development on the basis of regional approaches in education, for example, in energy generation, which we are involved with, in financial and communication services, and in health, in culture, these are best done on a regional basis. A century of experience of working in these thematic areas has taught us that development has the best outcome if it is done holistically, as I mentioned, if it is done in partnership with the communities, civil societies, and governments, as well as other development partners, and if it is done on a regional basis. Because very often the countries we are dealing with are much smaller in terms of the bigger regional powers, and they can make a big difference if they work together collectively on a regional basis and have some commonalities, amongst which education is going to be a very important common element, as health as well. We must not forget health, and the pandemic has just shown us how important regional approaches to health are. Our longest experience of development is in the school and university education, where we keep a keen eye on market needs and employment opportunities. It's not just to educate and then people take a degree and run around with a piece of paper to find a job, but we first study what the job market is and then establish the majors in our School of Arts and Sciences or in our School of Professional and Continuing Education, where we have trained a large number of people in short courses, and in the research that we conduct in our Graduate School of Development. The Aga Khan Development Network operates 200 schools in these regions that I mentioned, and it has got 2 universities, the Aga Khan University and the University of Central Asia. For over 100 years, education, especially for women, has been our first vector in helping to improve the quality of life of the people. And I'm saying this as a Muslim, because very often the impression is that the Muslim societies don't value women's education. It's not so. CAMCA has done a remarkable demonstration that it is the women who are making a huge contribution compared to, for example, in some parts of South Asia or Africa. So women's education is critical for us, and that goes also for the market situation. They constitute 50% of the workforce in many parts of the region. Our educational work started first in the Indian subcontinent and then to Africa, and over the last 25 years we've been in Central Asia as well. Now, countries have been long acknowledging the importance of regional approaches on economic development, but they haven't done so as much on education or health, for example, which are even, in our experience, more critical drivers of development. Because if you don't have good education and good health, your economic development is not going to go through. I can speak a lot about this, but we can come back to these issues later in the session. We obviously have gained the experience that there is much to be gained on a regional basis by sharing curricula, teaching methods, faculty development, both at the university level and school level. The bottom line is that there are far better prospects for cohesion among regional countries if their future decision makers and leaders were educated together. This would not only lead to lifelong friendships, but give them a better understanding of each other. There are too many tensions going on. If people have studied together, thought together, played together, there are possibilities that they will continue to work together. And that has been the case even after the Soviet Union. There was a lot of cohesion. Slowly, there has been a divergence of nations. And I think we need to bring them together, and CAMCA is playing a very important role in this. So we established the University of Central Asia as a regional university, and which is focused on the education of mountain societies. I would also say that the founders included the Republic of Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic, the Republic of Tajikistan, and the Ismaili Imamate, all of whom signed as founders of this university an international treaty in 2000. And we went to work, and today, last week, we just graduated our first group of undergraduate degree holders. We have, in the meantime, our School of Professional and Continuing Education, which is focusing on short courses, market-oriented, immediate application of employment. We have trained 150,000 people. Now, our work includes work in Afghanistan also. It is not just the 3 countries I mentioned, but Afghanistan, which is also part of CAMCA. So we have 5-6 centers in Afghanistan. In all, we have 15 centers in which we impart education. Now, I wanted to also say that the conclusion is that the regional countries might take another look at this strategy of the education and be working much more collaboratively on education. Their markets are interchangeable. There is migration of one group of citizens to another. They go to Russia, they go to Uzbekistan, they go to Kazakhstan from any of these countries. And if they are working, if they are educated on a regional curricula or understanding of what's going on elsewhere, their prospects for employment are huge. Tailoring education systems to market needs rather than the old Soviet system in many parts of the CAMCA is a very important need. I also say that training in IT, multiple languages including English, Russian and Chinese. By the way, English is the language of instruction at the University of Central Asia. The center of gravity of economic development has significantly shifted from the west now to the east. And it is important for CAMCA regional countries to understand what it means to them. The aid may still be coming from the west and from wherever, but the development prospects are going to be much stronger with their linkages in the east. China, Russia and Kazakhstan and many other countries, Uzbekistan. So I'm just concluding these remarks with giving you some examples of what we have actually in practical terms done and what could be done in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kasim Laka. These were visionary comments for the whole region. Thank you for that. Dr. Fariz Ismail Zadeh, what do you think are the takeaways in terms of the innovation that you've been driving in Azerbaijan? Because we've heard from Dr. Kasim Laka in terms of inspiring women for education, supporting their participation in the labor force, with the regional collaboration based on the good practices on education in the region, which is still lacking. So what do you think are the solutions from your perspective, and also in terms of really coping with the rapidly changing market demands, and what is it that you see as a solution for the whole region, not only for Azerbaijan? Please.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be part of this panel, and I appreciate all other speakers as well. The education topic is very important topic for our region because the region is changing so fast, And one of the challenges is how to prepare a young generation of professionals for our economy, for our society, for our independent countries. So I have been working for 15 years at ADA University. This is a flagship university of Azerbaijan, which hosted the CAMCA forum. And one of the most important challenges, I would say, is that the Soviet era universities are feeling very detached from market economy. We have many universities who don't understand the demands of the market. They produce some specialties and professions that are not needed in the market. On the contrary, there are some specialties that are very much needed in the market, but somehow universities do not produce them. For example, I would say HR managers, data analytics, business analytics, designers, computer engineers, computer scientists, social media specialists. These are really hot professions that are much needed in the market, but graphic designers, but somehow our universities keep producing lawyers, international relations specialists. I don't know, there's a big mismatch. And also universities are somehow operating in their own universe, which very rarely interacts with the real market, real business. So in order to solve that mismatch, in order to solve that problem, we have been trying from the very first day of our university, we have been trying to work very closely with the corporate sector, with employers, with the real market, in order to create this bridge of communication between the educators and the consumers of this educational product. So we have created an advisory board composed of several representatives of corporations. And this advisory board helps us on many issues, including advising on curriculum, advising on skills that are needed, advising on some new degree programs. For example, we have recently opened data analytics program, which is very much needed in the market. We have opened marketing program, digital marketing program. These are the specialties that are needed in the market. Advisory board also helps us with fundraising, because relying on government funds is not enough. So we are doing active fundraising, and we are getting some sponsored money to fund some scholarships, fund some research projects, as well as special projects such as summer schools for students. And finally, relationships with corporate sector helps us to bring together research and innovation. Very often we see that research at universities is very much detached from real life. We want research to be applied. We want research to be real life based. So therefore, we often bring companies and our professors, students, researchers, young talents, and they discuss some research projects, innovative projects, some startup projects, and they work together on this. So this research is applied, and this research is demand driven. Demand meaning driven by the companies and driven by the consumers. Finally, I want to say that it's not only enough to work with corporate sector, but also it's very important to work with international partners. So internationalization, learning from the European universities' experience, developing mobility programs, partnership programs, dual degree programs has been really strengthening our university. And we have at the moment 5 double degree programs and 56 exchange programs with foreign universities. I'll conclude by saying that only by having open door policy, by reaching out to multiple stakeholders, by creating multilateral platforms, universities can develop, increase their quality of education, and really become epicenters of knowledge, innovation, and research in the societies. Thank you. I will stop here, and I will be happy to join the Q&A session later.
Thank you, Mr. Ismailzadeh. Indeed, I think you echoed what Dr. CAMCA was mentioning in terms of the mismatch and really contributing with the new skills to the labor market. Now, when you mentioned, I know that ADA University is a leading university, not only in Azerbaijan, but the wider region. And I think what Dr. CAMCA saying about having a together, I think it's something that ADA University was contributing to. I know that some of the leaders of the CAMCA region were also spending some time in executive education programs of ADA University. So it's highly commendable, and we would want to see more of that, I think, between the CAMCA countries. Now, let's switch to the next speaker. We have Mr. Hikmat Abdurrahmanov, who's doing an interesting work. He's a great multitasker, and he has an extraordinary story, not only about the country, Uzbekistan, but about his efforts in really driving different business projects. And he's the real living link between academia and industry that Dr. Ismail Zada was talking about. And Hikmat, if you can talk more about how do you make sure that at TIMSS University and other business projects you ensure this link and close this gap.
Thank you very much, Irnar. Good evening, dear colleagues, friends, on this panel discussion, and I'll be happy to share a little bit of let's say Uzbekistan's angle, what's happening here in terms of higher education, and how us as business people we have approached and became part of higher education, and how that potentially might go into a regional, let's say, collaboration, and we have some examples of that. So let me give you a little bit of the background information. Uzbekistan was pretty much closed in terms of higher education till 2016. You wouldn't see any private higher education institutions in the country. It was very much centralized, state dominated. There were only few international branches operating in Tashkent, but other than that, we had very low coverage. In 2016, which was the anti-record, we only had 8% of schools being able to enter the universities, and as a result, there was a huge problem of labor migration to nearby countries, Kazakhstan, Russia, and other countries in the world, because students, school graduates, were not able to get good quality education in the country. So the higher education sector was not open for competition, very centralized, very corrupt, as I said, poor quality and low coverage of the graduates were able to get higher education. So what changed was, with the new government, there was a new higher education strategy set by 2030. It was decided that there will be at least 30 private higher education institutions launched, plus different bilateral and international projects had to be foreign, Russian, UK, British, and other countries were invited to open their universities in the country. Currently, the situation improved a little bit. So we have around 15 to 20% of school graduates who are being able to get higher education these days. And we saw this as an opportunity as people who, as employers, as people who on a regular basis participated in various business schools and attended various universities and executive programs. We have seen this as an opportunity, and it took us 2 years of the negotiations with the government, learning various models around the world. Thanks to the power of our network, we have visited almost all regional countries, including Central Asia, including Caucasus, including Russia, Ukraine, and other developed and developed. We want to understand what are we lacking behind, what private universities are currently look like, what they have gone through, what kind of mistakes they've made during the 90s and 2000s. And gladly, last year, in the middle of pandemics, in the middle of quarantine, we got government's decree. We were were permitted to start our university, and throughout that research and analysis, we decided to go with British education standards, British education model, and language of instruction at our university is English. And we've been able to recruit a very small cohort of students last year. A bit less than 100 students started their BA education. And gladly, within a year and a half, we've gone through a very rigorous and comprehensive procedure of validation. We got validated by LSB, University, which validated our 3 courses. All of them are focused on entrepreneurship because we are business background people. It is 8 founders who joined all together their efforts, and this university, Team University, is completely funded by private companies, mostly champions in their fields. Our company is in trade. One of our founders is one of the leading owner of retail chain, the biggest retail chain. We have 2 representatives of financial sector who also decided to join this project. So all 3 courses, one is in international business, as Fariz was just referring to. We have seen a huge demand in specialists, and that's the topic of our main topic of our conversation, that we decided to match the existing gap between the market and the universities. Our observation are really lagging behind. They're not providing competitive and up-to-date professions, and we decided that international business marketing and digital innovation, that is what we have started with. Obviously, all of these 3 courses are very much interlinked with entrepreneurship as a philosophy and concept. What we also decided to do, and that's, I think, something that we really understand, that we are actually setting the standard because we're one of the youngest and first private universities in the country. We decided to go with the proper good governance, and we have set the board of trustees that is led by strong professionals who have regional and international experience. Recently, Andrew Wachtel, who was the rector of AUCA in Bishkek, joined us, our board of trustees, to be the chairman. We have the first rector of Skolkovo Business School, also Andrei Volkov, to join our board. And we have a number of other independent directors who are ensuring that we as founders actually delegating all the powers to professionals, and they in their own level then appoint right people at the university. So we thought that starting it right from the beginning is very important, and this year we are actually expanding our campus. We're expanding the programs. As Fariz mentioned, we also focus very much on industry links. We have launched our entrepreneurship hub, acceleration and incubation programs, which is also, I think, really helping us a lot to position ourselves as a very practical orientated institution. So coming to the conclusion of my, let's say, comments and let's say, exchanging experience from my side, is to become mid-sized university of around 1,500 to 2,000 students, being one of the leaders in business among business universities. But interestingly, we don't want to limit ourselves by only business fields. As it was said, we really also would like to explore opportunities within the disciplines, various disciplines. On one side, let's say technical, scientific, arts and design, but on the other edge, we want to interlink that with entrepreneurship, and we see that this interdisciplinary approach would really make a difference, and will produce very competitive graduates who will, right after that, and actually within the process of their education, will enter the job market, not only of Uzbekistan, we also would like to establish regional cooperation with regional players as well. So this is just some highlights. As Yernar, you mentioned, being very practical orientated, being really within that process. We understand that we are really baby university, and the whole industry is really young because it just opened up, and gladly we can exchange that experience with the countries that have started this journey several decades earlier than us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hikmat. Uzbekistan was named the country of the year, I think it was last year. Now, in terms of the pace of reforms, and then including the reforms of education system in Uzbekistan, I mean, I can argue that you are to a certain extent a product of this opening up and reforms in Uzbekistan. Now, in your opinion, should the education reforms begin at the top or at the bottom of educational systems? How to make sure that these education systems evolve fast enough to really match that market demand? If you can add your comments.
Yeah, Bernard, there are very hot discussions on whether higher education sector should completely become liberalized in the country. On one hand, and all the procedures of getting the licenses and permits has to be just taken away and just open it up to be a very liberal sector. On the other hand, obviously, all those big dinosaurs and big players, there's a sense that they will not be able to adjust instantly. So there has been a number of state universities that were chosen to be, let's say, an example and a sandbox to really experiment what has to be done. That reminds me of Russian model of transformation or reforms. They have this program which is called 5-100, when they, let's say, and they're trying through those champions, they are trying to really bring reforms to all higher education industry. If you ask my opinion, I am more fond of more liberal competitive model. I think that if we really continue protecting and creating those, let's say, very protective environment for the universities, they will not be able to transform, and it's a huge sector with employing hundreds of thousands or probably even millions of people. Yes, this is going to be a tough time, but I think it's better to go through that very instantly. That probably reminds us of a more, let's say, Georgian model, when liberalization happened at once, obviously with its own pros and cons, but at the end of the day, I visited almost all big projects, Georgian, let's say, universities, private universities, and I gone through even actually exporting services, educational services to nearby countries. That to me really shows a good model of how transformation should happen.
Excellent. So we should deregulate from the top, but the real education reform should come from the bottom in terms of the competitive universities in an open competition. All right, thank you. Now we have Talant Sultanov, who's heading the Kyrgyz chapter for Internet Society. It's an interesting organization. If you can tell more, Talant, more about how you are contributing to the education system, and is it to do with the vocational training, short-term education, building the vocational skills, or we're talking about the long-term education programs? Please.
Thanks so much, Yernar. I had prepared a few slides. If possible, can we bring them up to screen?
Please.
So, as you mentioned, Yernar, I am representing here the Kyrgyz chapter of the Internet Society. It's a pleasure to be part of this very distinguished panel, and I'm very glad that we are able to share our experience and maybe some of our knowledge with participants of today's forum. And I'd like to thank organizers for inviting us. Next slide, please. So, answering to your question, Yernar, actually all of the above. And what really is what we're trying to do is we saw from the previous presentations, as well as from the presentation of the keynote speaker today, Douglas Becker, there is kind of tidal shift happening in the educational sector. And the new technologies, internet connectivity is helping us and opening up lots of opportunities. From the other hand, these opportunities are only available for those who are connected. And if we look at the map of Central Asia, in this slide, I'm speaking more about the CA part of the CAMCA abbreviation. We can see that half of the population of Central Asia are not using the internet, and several countries of the region are actually below the global standards in terms of internet connectivity. And if we look at the broadband connectivity, the figures are significantly less. Next slide. So what that means in practical terms, it means that if you, for example, would like to download a movie or an educational film, it will take you hours and hours in our region to actually download and watch this film if you have the internet connectivity. However, there is a huge problem that so many people of in our countries do not have such a luxury. Next slide, please. So there are several challenges related to this, why we have such bad statistics in terms of internet access. And we can see that the big issue is infrastructure is not available everywhere. Especially, it's such a big challenge for Central Asia because we are landlocked continent. Some of the countries in the region are landlocked and mountainous. Some of the countries are double landlocked, like Uzbekistan, from where is our previous speaker. Next slide, please. And this situation, and especially COVID, has shown that the digital divide is there in our region, and it's actually widening. And the World Bank has conducted the statistics that only 0.6%, that is less than 1% of poor households have computers or devices. What does it mean? That if you are a kid in a village, then the issue is one, does your village have the internet connectivity or your home? But even if there is connectivity, there are very few devices available for people in rural and remote areas. And even if we talk about television, that during COVID times, students had to learn lessons from TV. But what if you have several children in the household and only one television set? A big challenge. Another issue has to do with skills. So maybe you have the internet, maybe you have the devices, but are you able to use these devices and the internet productively? And it's not only about children. Maybe actually children are better adapters, but it's about teachers who have to deal with these challenges. It's about parents who have to help children do studies online. And another major issue and another major challenge for our countries is the relevant educational content. So if we have the internet connectivity and everything and devices, but the content is either in different languages, in the languages that we don't understand, or it's not very much relevant to our educational purposes. So having relevant content is another major issue. Next slide, please. So what we as Internet Society have been trying to do, as Yernar, you were posing a question, what's the best approach, top down or bottom up? I think it has to be both. And during the COVID situation, of course, the governments and the ministries, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, Ministry of Education, tried to connect every school to the internet. However, in the country, there were 20 villages that were extremely difficult to connect to the internet. They were unconnected. And you can see in this village, one of them is located in our Batken province. And to get there, you have to walk through the narrow mountain passes and bring in the equipment. And this village has no electricity, and no radio, no TV, and of course no internet. And these are some of the areas where we are trying to work from our bottom-up approach. And the goal is to demonstrate that if we can connect to the internet the most difficult locations, then all the locations in the middle we should be able to connect. Next slide, please. If they have no internet, we have solutions such as offline digital libraries. So it's, in our case, we called it the Ilim box, and we brought to all the schools in the country which had no internet connectivity these devices, which you can see on the picture on the left, very small device, and you don't need to have internet connectivity, and you don't even have to have electricity. You can see a small solar panel which would help power this device, and you can access all the educational content that's available through your smartphone. Next slide, please. And here I would like to present maybe some of the suggestions how we could improve the situation so that every child, every teacher, anywhere in in our countries could benefit from this technological revolution, this 4.0. One of the recommendations is what we call is dig once policy. You can see this picture is actually very close to my home. This was a very beautiful paved asphalt road just built 2 years ago. But then, of course, they didn't put up the communications infrastructure, and they decided to do it after the road was renovated. And you can see it's all dug up, and there is no more asphalt. But if we have this dig once policy, we could do it at once, and people could enjoy infrastructure better. Next slide. Another major issue is that you don't have to have a broadband or internet through internet cables. You can use radio spectrum to reach locations which are very far or which are very remote mountainous areas. However, the issue of spectrum, it's like it's called spectrum hoarding. Big companies get all the spectrum, or the government keeps the spectrum to itself, and small companies or small entrepreneurs are not able to use it to be able to connect all the remote areas. So spectrum management is another area where we need to look. Next slide. We would need to promote more competition. Now, as Hikmat was saying, that there were very few universities. Now there are, thanks to right regulations, competition is coming up. Same has to be with telecom companies, internet providers. The consolidation is in the sector is very real. Not only on the global scale, where you have Googles and the Facebooks gobbling up very small startups, but also on the level of our countries. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, we can see how all the small companies are actually disappearing, and instead of the market, instead of diversifying, it's actually becoming a oligopoly or monopoly. Next slide, please. We need to support, coming back to the question, the bottom-up initiatives. Actually, this is a 17-year-old kid, high school kid in a very remote village. We taught him how to connect internet cables to the households, and now he is the guy to go to. Every house wants his name is Iskender, to come and help them connect to the internet, which we brought to this village using wireless technologies. Next slide. Sharing infrastructure is another big issue. You can see here it's 3 cell phone towers in the same locations. We have 3 mobile operators in the country. So instead of cooperating and putting all their antennas on one tower, they each has to build their own, because there is no encouragement of sharing infrastructure and cooperating. Next slide, please. And I think one of the last concluding slides here is the very major issue of privacy and personal data protection. The more we go online, the more children and students become digitally connected, the bigger this issue will become. And this picture is just an ordinary intersection in Bishkek, and you can see just on one of the poles there are 3 cameras, most likely with face recognition technologies, and total cameras on this very ordinary intersection is, I think, almost a dozen. And we as citizens don't know what's happening with all this data that these cameras are collecting. Who is using them? How they are using it? Nobody knows. Next slide, please. So this was actually the last slide and the conclusion of my presentation. So I just like to conclude saying that there are so many opportunities opening up thanks to new technologies. However, there is this part of the society which is unconnected, and in our region the situation is actually worse than globally. But there are ways where we can even individual initiatives or small level initiatives can make a major difference in bringing people to the internet, so that they would be able to access educational resources, so that they can improve their digital skills, and so that they could compete in the global economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Talant. I think thank you for sharing the good practices. I think something that we should now steer the conversation towards. Now, we know the challenges, of course, the ICT infrastructure and overall infrastructure. Getting the basics right is still on the agenda of the CAMCA countries. Let's be open about it. Now, but if we can steer the conversation towards the good practices that Talant was sharing, some of them bigger, some of them small, but importantly, to really share the good practices among the CAMCA countries would be beneficial to all the countries, I guess, to all the policymakers. So I know how much amazing entrepreneurial spirit is there in Kyrgyzstan. It's extraordinary that I've experienced myself. So it's important that we have we share this spirit across the CAMCA countries. We have Irakli Laitadze. Dr. Laitadze is an interesting professional coming from international relations background, but also being from a wider strong education background, now contributing to Georgia as in a leading private sector investor company. Would you please share your views how how actually investors see the education system and how what solutions you see in this field?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. And so good morning to those who are now in Washington, D.C. and Toronto, and good afternoon, good evening to those who are in CAMCA now. And I take this opportunity to thank Rumsfeld Foundation for organizing our reunion, and it's my privilege to participate in this panel. And thank you, my dear panel colleagues. I will start with my personal experience and then move towards the macro situation. Although I'm a lecturer in the university, this is not my main occupation. I'm on the, let's say, receiving side of the higher and vocational education. I represent the demand part of the invisible hand of the market. What allows me to say so, because I hold the position of the Chief Financial Officer at GMT Group, one of the leading and most venerable Georgian companies in the sphere of hospitality and real estate development. We own and operate landmark and historic spots throughout the capital city. And until recently, we owned the company named Sante, which is the bigger local player in the production and distribution of dairy products. And later we sold it to the French multinational Lactalis. So as a member of a top management team, I either participated or witnessed very many, maybe hundreds of job interviews in such diverse fields like service, cooking, engineering, production, IT, HR, security, internal audit, accountancy, financial management, marketing, middle-level management, general management. And despite the fact that we offer competitive salaries, it's not easy to find decent professionals. And once we select someone, until signing long-term employment contract, we have them on 3 months paid probation period. During this period, sometimes we encounter another set of problems, so-called soft skills problems, like in this case, lower than expected responsibility and even the negligence toward the jobs assigned. And finally, we do manage to gather the cream, but it's not that there is an abundance of it in the market, although situation has been improving in last year. I will start from basic and high school education, and as there is no higher education without basic school education, and I will move to higher and vocational education. Well, the state expenditure on education has increased from 2.8% of GDP to 3.6% of GDP in last 6 years, and will reach 6% of GDP in 2022, which is a very positive dynamics. Although the reforms foresee the new school model, professional development of teacher, increased access, quality, and variety of vocational education. Just a few words, what is the new school model mean? This is an innovative model, and it means moving from centralized to decentralized approach, more gearing toward the needs of skilled pupils, more autonomy to schools in choosing the teaching materials and the means to implement the knowledge. The teachers will not be given like concrete lesson recommendation, but will be supplied with long-term objectives, which will serve to develop the analytical abilities of the kids. And the digital technology will be the part of the process. As of now, this project has been implemented in 178 schools on the level of 1 to 6 grades, and by year 2024, the project should be implemented in all public schools of Georgia. Also, the government has created rather favorable conditions for private education. There are quite a lot of private schools and higher educational institutions. But there are problems that persist, though they are not unsurmountable. Well, in secondary and high schools, there is, let's say, around 1 teacher per 9 pupils in Georgia, which is higher than average OECD indicator, which is 1 teacher per 14 people. But there is a deficit in both in functional areas like science and mathematics, as well as in geographic areas, rural and mountainous settlements. Due to the excessive number of teachers, this profession remains low-paid job and is by around 30% lower than the average salary throughout the country, despite the fact that the salaries of the teacher has been increasing by 45% in the year 2014-2019. The professional vocational education is not prestigious in Georgia. By the end of 2019, so I'm speaking about pre-COVID times mostly, only 6% of students of relevant age group were engaged in vocational education, while more than 60% was studying in higher educational institutions. The number of students enrolled in vocational education has been decreasing from 21,000 in 2013 until 12,000 in 2019. And situation is more difficult because the majority of professional colleges, the few they are mostly located in capital city. This deficit is partly compensated by the private company that offer on-the-job training. Then, however, paradoxical it may sound, higher education doesn't increase the employment chances adequately. The reasons for low return on this educational investment is twofold. First, the system of higher education supplies greater number of graduates and postgraduates than needed. The current economic structure of Georgia requires more personnel of low qualification and qualified handymen like mechanics, carpenters, plumbers, electricians. And the second reason is that the future higher education students take uninformed decisions about the prospective job markets. As a result, there is either unemployment or inadequacy between the occupied position and received education. While the average growth of Georgian economy was 5.1% in the year 2011-2019, the contribution of workforce was only 0.8%, and the rest of the increase was due to the capital accumulation and increase of the productivity. The economy of Georgia does not create sufficient jobs for university graduates. While more than 60% of students are college graduates, only 35% of entry positions actually require higher education. This is more the structural problem of like a structural situation of the economy. So then college graduates are forced to seek the employment in low qualification jobs, which leads to the gross misallocation of the human resources. As an example, like more than 50% of vacant entries were in tourist service positions and as a sales consultant. This is caused by the dominance of tourism and trade in Georgian economy. Another problem is agriculture, which remains very ineffective sector, which saps 36% of workforce with the output of only 7% of GDP. In general, the chance of unemployment of youngsters in the age of 20-25 years is by 70% higher than those of their parents. The higher than average remuneration in financial and law sectors pushes prospective students to engage in the studies of management, finance, accountancy, law. In 2019, 55% of graduates were coming from these fields of studies, while the economy simply doesn't require that number of lawyers and accountants. And like the international comparison proves also this unreasonable allocation. As I have mentioned, 55% of Georgian graduates come from the fields of management, finance, accountancy, while such global finance centers as UK and USA are. A respective ratio of such kind of students are 19 and 17% of respectively. Meanwhile, in Georgia, the ratio of students engaged in studies of engineering, construction, production, which and these sectors account 24% of GDP, this ratio of students is only 8%. So as per employees surveys, the deficit of technical skills is a big challenge. Well, I think the education policy of Georgia should be more geared towards economic structure of the country, as well as aiming to push it out of low value-added economic activity. The priority is probably are the sectors of civil engineering, logistics, transport, energy, infrastructure, business process outsourcing like customer service management, IT, computer engineering, big data analysis. We are a typical country in the lower middle income trap, and if we want to get out of this trap, and we do want, more knowledge intensive jobs should be created. At the end, I would like to say the following. Well, I guess that I'm an old school man, thus I still don't see universities as a factory stamping out money-making men and women. While IT, computer engineering, law, and accountancy are noble pursuits, and in general, any kind of honest work is God blessed, still the pure mathematics, pure physics, pure chemistry, classics, philosophy, and disciplines like this make the countries great. And with all due respect to not financial managers, lawyers, and farmers are able to do so. I partly answered the Alisher's question or remark, I guess. So basically, that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Laitadze. A lot of statistics, interesting data. Indeed, it's something that, you know, that there's a story behind what you're saying, the story about Georgia, and about the reform that we've been following, whether it be the police reform or the education system and other. And I think it's something that we should be studying. And what I think Fariz Ismailzadeh was mentioning, the research, the regional research that is lacking is something that we should do together. As ADA universities, we're focusing on researching the countries of the region. I think it's important to really research each other in terms of the good practices, in terms of actually making the case study of each country's, each university's success stories, so that we can, you know, leverage, because it's much more important to learn from each other than from far advanced economies whose experience might be of less limited relevance to our economies. Now, Dr. Laitadze, I mean, in terms of the reforms that I think that you mentioned that are important, of course, the traditional universities are important, but when it comes to actually making money, and you are from the private sector, we see that, you know, some people with no university degrees are earning more money than those with the higher education degrees. So it's a kind of it's a paradox of these days, right? So what is it that we should do as policymakers to make sure that our education systems are up to date? Maybe we should focus switch the focus from the higher education to vocational education, to make sure that at least our youngsters, you know, can be financially stable with short-term courses, making more money, and actually, you know, really improving their lives in the end, instead of having oversupply of highly educated labor force.
Yes, in this case, like in the case of Georgia, the market. Okay, when I started like my financial career, like it was many years ago, so it was really lack and deficit of it. But now the market is saturated and oversaturated with accountants, with financial managers, with general managers, with lawyers, and just economy cannot produce the vacancies, like the jobs for them. So and the structure of Georgian economy is that it's on the end, unfortunately, it's on the end of our comparative advantage is the cheap labor force, and like a asset, like a geographical position, which is just God given, and so. But as the financial sectors and law sectors offer much higher compensation, the people still strive, but they herd out because there are no places available. So they are kind of settled with a lower qualification jobs, which causes the frustration, personal frustration, and social tensions, etc. So vocational training, vocational job. Okay, everybody wants their children to be financial directors. No, nobody wants them to be carpenters, or less people want them to be carpenters. But Switzerland is a very good example when quite a considerable part of the population don't have high education, and they're very well off. So maybe this is the tool, either to adjust to the market demands. Otherwise, the market forces will just leave you, I mean, the person on the margins of the society. And another outcome is that with quite accurate government involvement, and also by considering the overall market forces and market dynamics of the world, that the country starts to move from labor-intensive jobs to labor-intensive comparative advantage to more knowledge-based or resource-based comparative human resource, but it's a longer-term solution, I would say.
Thank you, Dr. Leitadze. Gentlemen, it's been an interesting interaction, extremely insightful comments from everyone. And we have an interesting question also to all the panelists. It goes like this: 30 years ago, the higher education system in the CAMCA area was able to provide world-class education, for example, mathematics, physics, and chemistry schools in Uzbekistan, etc. Will the region be able to reach that level again? If yes, then when? So, gentlemen, who can take up the question? Please, Dr. Maybe Dr. Leitadze, we can give the floor to Dr. Kasimlaka, and then we can get back to you. Please, Dr. Kasimlaka, if you can switch on your microphone, please.
As someone who has been involved for the last 10 years on the reform of higher education in Pakistan, I was leading this effort. I can tell you that there is no magic wand. That which has taken a couple of generations to deteriorate cannot be put right in a matter of 5 years. Because the problem is that it is like the problem of the graveyard. It's difficult to move the graveyard because you do not have the cooperation of the occupants. I don't know if you understood the point. The point is that faculty members do not want change. The deans and all the senior people are not interested in change and reforms. They are the ones who will assiduously oppose any changes because they know better, in the Soviet time or in the previous, before our country became independent from British or whatever it was, we used to be this. Well, we have to take a modern look. So the reforms have to be worked, as somebody has already mentioned here, from the top but also to the bottom. And it is extremely important, first of all, that the government has a political will. If the government doesn't have a political will to face reforms, to face some demonstrations by faculty members or by students, because reforms means you give up the rights of some and you increase the rights of others as well. So political will is the starting point. Secondly, you got to take the university leadership and the faculty along, and the students will come along if the faculty are with you. And that means more dialogue, giving them a role in the reforms, not simply saying these are the reforms, you implement them. So I think the last part of the question, if so when, I think it will take maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years if we are fortunate, because it's like an oil tanker. It cannot be shifted. It cannot shift its direction in a matter of seconds or a matter of minutes. It takes a long time to take a different turn. So a lot of patience, working with the political will, working with those who are the faculty members and leaders of the university, working with employers. They should be the drivers as well, asking for reforms. And the taxpayers are the ones who are giving money to the universities. They should have a say in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Maybe Dr. Leitadze, a quick comment, then we switch to Talant. Sultana, please.
Sure. Trying to answer to Alisher's question, the fact that truly the schools of mathematics and physics and chemistry were rather developed throughout the Soviet Union, but this was my guess is that this was the unique country within unique historic circumstances. The whole economy and the whole infrastructure was geared towards the incoming or impending war. So the fundamental sciences were very, very important for the preparation of the war, for the preparation, development of the weaponry, different size of weapon, being it nuclear or being it chemical or biological or just the firearms. And even at the schools, if you remember at the military lessons we were given, at the age of 15, I knew how to disassemble and reassemble the Kalashnikov assault rifle. I was taught this in the school. And so the fact that these subjects we are developed, that's we are coming out of the interest of the state. While like social sciences like psychology or economics or sociology were basically neglected or on a very embryonic level of development in Soviet Union. Of course, the mathematics, pure chemistry, pure physics, it's a luxury and it's affordable only on the affordable either by very wealthy private institutions like the United States, big universities, or just directly government sponsored. And I don't know whether we will be able to continue these schools, unfortunately. I'm not sure about this.
Thank you, Dr. Lutazza. Please, Mr. Talas Sultanov.
Yes, that's a very good question. I'd like to look from a little bit different angle at this issue. I think it is possible that our countries produce very high quality specialists. However, finding jobs for these specialists in our countries, well, at least in Kyrgyzstan, it's a big issue and huge challenge that we are facing at the moment. And I think many developing countries are dealing with the same, especially in countries where, you know, we are following this social model, right, where we subsidize education. All these people who have been trained, you know, to become doctors or to become ICT experts are leaving the country. So, for example, you know, Fariz mentioned that state helps train these people in the universities, but they don't find opportunities at home and they leave for better opportunities abroad. And there is one very kind of close case to us here. It's one of our own fellows, Aziz Abakirov, who was the champion of IT sector in Kyrgyzstan, and he coined the term live in Kyrgyzstan and work with the whole world, was headhunted into Almaty. And now he took his slogan with him, and now the slogan is live in Almaty and work with the world. But it's just a kind of an example of, you know, of a very serious problem, you know, of our countries are going to lose specialists and how we're going to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. If we don't have other comments, I'm mindful of time. Let me conclude and wrap up the discussion. And I think it's a daunting task for me because we've had numerous insightful comments. But overall, I think the questions were about how to make sure that our education systems are fast enough in terms of evolving to the market demands, to make sure that we match the demand of the labor market, and to make sure that we actually contribute in the end to the well-being, to the welfare of citizens. But overall, I think we've discussed the matters and I think good practices across the region that every country in the CAMCA region are demonstrating, and that should be researched more and shared across the board. And importantly, we should facilitate these avenues when regional leaders, the younger generation leaders of the CAMCA region can actually spend time together, study together, really experiment and drive common projects together, so that we have less disagreements and more commonalities to work on together. But we also talked about how the education for the women, and I think that women's participation in the labor force is extremely an important topic in Central Asia and the Caucasus and wider CAMCA region, and I think it should be further promoted. Of course, we talked about the Soviet universities, the Soviet-based universities, I guess, that are appearing to be a bit detached from the market. They should be reformed, and I think it's to do with the policymakers in particular, and of course the issue of the academia and industry link is still there, and there are different solutions to that coming from different universities that were mentioned here. Clearly, regional research should be further promoted to make sure that we understand each other, we understand the countries and the good practices that are plenty of that should be studied together. But more importantly, what was mentioned, I guess, is the competition, is the openness of this, of the policymakers and the system for open competition to make sure that there is a deregulation, liberalization of the education system from the top, and there's space for competition so that only the strongest institutions survive. That's an important message. We talked about getting the basics right. We talked about the ICT infrastructure lacking in the other areas that we should get things done before we talk about the innovation, before we talk about empowering every citizen. Clearly, the urban and rural gap still is very wide across the CAMCA countries, and it's something to do with the financing and bridging this gap. Comes to the question of regional collaboration as well. We've heard interesting good practices from Kyrgyzstan and other countries in terms of the offline digital libraries, the spectrum management, other big and small initiatives that could be studied further to really benefit the wider audience. But I think the concluding point is if there is a genuine political will to drive the reforms in education sector, and if so, then how to ensure that we collaborate together as one region, as CAMCA region, to capitalize on this political will, to make sure that our education systems evolve fast enough so that we can provide quality education and create quality jobs. I think with this, I would like to conclude this session, and this concludes the whole CAMCA forum of this year. And it's been a particular pleasure and privilege for me to serve you and the wider audience as the moderator. And look forward to our collaboration. Let's drive projects together. Let's really continue this conversation. And the 1-hour discussion does not do justice to the complexity and the multidimensionality of the question of education system. And with this, I would like to wholeheartedly thank every panelist for this amazing session, and we look forward to our future events. Thank you.
Thank you very much for moderating. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, Yernar.
Thank you all.
colleagues.
Bye.
Cheers.